Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you logged in today. Um, it's a pleasure to having you all as a part of my guest on the another podcast on accessibility. I have a very important guest who looks after certifications primarily in the space of accessibility to the professionals from across the world. Uh, I have today Samantha Evans, who is looking after the certifications for IAP, and she's responsible for ensuring that the quality of the talent which comes in the space of accessibility meets to the standards of the industry and improves going forward. It's such a pleasure having you, Samantha, and you owe a very important role in ensuring an accessible workplace and an accessibility first digital future for not only in India but across the globe. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm always happy to talk about disability inclusion and accessibility, no matter where in the world. So my name is Samantha Evans. I live in the United States. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I work with IAAP, that's the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And we are part of a larger United Nations-based advocacy organization called G3ICT. The G3ICT works about enforcing the United Nations Convention of Rights of People with Disabilities to ensure accessibility. And the ICT part is particularly about information and communication technology. So while the focus is on digital technology for G3ICT in our advocacy work, we do work across both the digital space, physical space, and policy. So that's a little background on myself. I am deaf and hard of hearing, so I have a significant hearing loss. I use hearing aids, and so I do lip read. I don't sign yet. I would love to learn, so I do not use sign language. And I also have a math disability. I have dyscalculia, so as a student, math was terribly complicated and presented a lot of barriers until I learned that there were adaptive strategies and technologies I could use to make math not a hard thing. So it still takes a little extra work, but so I come to work in accessibility as a person with a disability, and also with a long background in advocacy myself. So.
Thank you so much for that elaborate introduction. And while I did my engineering, to tell you honestly, Sam, maths was also not one of my own favorite subjects. In spite of my having completed engineering, numbers weren't my friends from a very early age. I think it was more about communications, which had my first love too. But yeah, unfortunately, or fortunately, I live in a country where we first do engineering. The common joke in India is we first become an engineer and then decide where your career will take you. But it's like important to complete your engineering first. So that's the story of mine. But yeah, thank you so much. Coming back to the subject for the day. Sam, something which you manage, the certifications, I believe, for core competency and for ensuring the quality of the accessible talent which comes in certification. It goes without saying is a very important thing. Can you explain the various levels of certification and the significance in the field of accessibility that IAP offers, and how do you differentiate between these certifications?
Super. So we have 4 different certifications. So they're
Okay.
not necessarily levels. So we'll start with our foundation, the core competencies. So CPACC is the Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. So that core
Mhm.
competency means that our minimally qualified candidate is somebody that understands and can apply the concepts of understanding disabilities, understanding the
Okay.
barriers and challenges people with disabilities face, both in the
Okay.
digital and physical world, so that we can be
Right.
better advocates and build better environments.
Okay.
Understanding how prevalent types of disabilities are,
Mm.
understanding core tenets of web accessibility, so not technical in nature, but the core tenets of perceivable, operable, understandable, and relatable, the POUR, and then understanding universal design, universal design for learning, which helps us share information in multiple modes,
Mm.
and then laws and regulations around the world, and how do I build accessibility into an organization. So
Okay.
CPACC is a broad foundation. So it covers a lot of information across a lot of areas, but it will be helpful
Okay.
for everyone that wants to
Okay.
incorporate disability inclusion and accessibility. So
Okay.
for CPACC or CPAC, the exam began, that certification was first launched in 2016. So we are now
Okay.
7 years in and now have more than 4,000 CPACs around the world in more than 70
Okay.
countries. So
Right.
lots of folks are becoming accessibility champions, influencers, and change makers, which is what CPAC is
Gotcha.
designed to support. So
Okay.
everyone, no matter how advanced you are, we do require at least 1 year's professional experience because it is a
Okay.
professional certification, either working in accessibility or you have a new role where accessibility is part of your responsibilities, or you have a desire to build accessibility into your professional career. So those are the entry points for CPACC or CPAC.
Okay. Okay.
Then we have 3 technical certifications. So the technical
Okay.
certifications are not expert level, but they are an intermediate level of knowledge, and they do have requirements for experience. So in order to
Okay.
qualify as a candidate, there needs to be
Okay.
documented roles and responsibilities, which means either someone gives us a resume that clearly shows that they've done this work, and the work is what's in the body of knowledge, which is the document that relays all of the information on the exam, which are all free and available
Okay.
online, which are great resources too. But the body of
Right.
knowledge lists the job task. What are the things that the minimally
Mm.
qualified candidate should have already been doing for a number of years to show that they're
Right.
proficient in this work? So it's not a starting point for intermediate technical
Mm.
exams. So they are for people already in the field. So
Okay.
WAS, the Web Accessibility Specialist, is the one that's most popular for folks that work in the technical side of digital
Okay.
accessibility.
Okay.
WAS or WAS has a
Mm.
requirement of a minimum of 3 years of already
Okay.
doing the work in web accessibility. So
Right.
somebody has already been doing this work for 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
then they qualify as the candidate. So WAS talks about understanding the core tenets of digital technical accessibility. So it's not about
Right.
writing code from scratch, but
Mm.
understanding HTML, HTML5, JavaScript,
Mm.
CSS, how that's related, understanding ARIA, when to use it, when not to use it, the differences between roles and labels. So having contextual applied knowledge and understanding of the semantic side of digital technical accessibility and WCAG and how that works,
Right.
not just concept knowledge, but I've done this for 3+ years, so I have encountered it in live customer sites or engagement. The WASP moves on into a second area that's testing. So quality
Mm.
assurance, usability
Right.
testing, and accessibility testing across operating systems, across browsers, and across a variety of types of assistive technology. Because if you've been
Okay.
doing this for more than 2 or 3 years, you should know how to use
Mm.
the big products that are out in the field. Because we
Correct.
can't determine what kind of technology someone has access to or
Right.
what their preferences are. So we need to make sure that in our testing practices that we are testing across different services and different options. We can't expect everyone in the world have access to an Apple product.
Absolutely.
Financially, that's
Absolutely.
outside of so many people's realms of possibility. So we also can't dictate what browser they use or what type of
Mm.
assistive technology. So that cross collaboration and in understanding why that matters, but most importantly is what's the impact on people. And that's why our testing component in WAS is about the impact on people, not just meeting compliance code. So you'll find in each of our technical programs that there is a requirement to understand the impact on disabled people as our primary focus. So the
Got
last
it.
part of WAS is audit and remediation. So there's an expectation, and this is a bit of a stretch. Sometimes engineers don't do
Okay.
audits, but they
Right.
may receive an audit on their product and have to resolve. So audits and recommend remediation. So how do you write up an audit? What's the biggest priority? How do you make that
Mm.
how do you highlight that as the most strategic important for the client that you're serving? So WAS is that intermediate technical for digital tech accessibility. The
Correct.
next
Understood.
is accessible document specialist. And so everyone creates documents, every group,
Hmm.
every organization. And not everything can be made to be web. Not everything is designed to be displayed on the web. So document
Right.
accessibility talk is for people with a minimum of 1 year experience where their responsibility is to either create or remediate documents. So that's going to be word
Okay.
processing, spreadsheets, presentations, or
Hmm.
desktop publishing, and writing accessible content. And that includes plain language, but also how
Hmm.
you use Office suites that we all use to produce an accessible document in that authoring format, but also to export it into a final format and retain the accessibility features. And often that means having more knowledge than just what happens in an accessibility checker, but
Okay.
understanding some more advanced tags, structures, how semantic tags, are navigation,
Hmm.
and how you test for accessibility. And that's going to be across different platforms and assistive tech, but also what happens when you get a scanned document that you have to manually tag from scratch. So ADS is a unique skill set, and it's
Hmm.
great when people get that. So we want them to be able to illustrate their competencies and for organizations to understand the value of accessible documents.
Got it.
The last in our set of technical certifications is the certified professional and accessible built environment. So that's physical spaces. So that's going to be building structures, parks.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's going to be actual what our bodies engage with in the physical sense.
Right.
And so
Understood.
the built environment program has 3
Hmm.
levels, and level 1 starts for people with a minimum of 3 to 5 years of experience in
Okay.
one particular type of building or structure and only focus on one type of disability. Often we'll find that somebody who works in public spaces or housing, and they focus on people with physical mobility disabilities. So level
Hmm.
2 then moves into more years of experience, more types of buildings, more types of disabilities. And level 3 is for 10 years plus with even more diversity in their portfolio. So those are the different certifications and how they
Okay.
differentiate. And so one is not required to do the other. There's not a prerequisite of CPAC
Okay.
before BOSS,
Hmm.
and there's not
Right.
an order. Usually people
Hmm.
pursue the certification that's what they're most familiar with and what they do every day first.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sam, for walking us through the various levels of certifications and its importance. And you know, it's beyond the digital space also. It's just not the internet accessibility or the digital accessibility, where you also spoke about the physical accessibility, about buildings, about premises, which also IAP looks into. That was something which maybe it's my for the less initiated, they weren't aware that it's just beyond the digital space also that IAP works. And thank you so much for sharing this. The next part, Sam, when it comes to accessibility, it's an ever evolving and it's a lot of advancements which are happening with time. So how does the IAP certification, factor for this, and how do we go about ensuring that the new set of talents which are coming in are at pace to the advancements which are happening in this space?
So we have a requirement as a certifying organization to review every few years to make sure that those job tasks are
Hmm.
still valid. So that is a survey that
Right.
happens. So we make sure that those job tasks, what's expected of someone, is still valid. Now, we will see standards change in industry, and that means we will update our content
Hmm.
in what's called the body of knowledge. So usability testing, compliance testing is still a valid job task for somebody in digital technology. What's changed
Right.
is the European Accessibility, you know, the EAA or the Web Accessibility Directive or WCAG 2.2 coming forward. While it's
Hmm.
published, it won't be updated for the EN mandates until 2025. So 2.2 is out there in the world. We want people to stay abreast of that, but we can't test to it until it's adopted and in
Hmm.
place. So
Right.
our current updates, we update usually once every 2 years at the very longest, a
Okay.
body of knowledge.
Okay.
We will update links and resources, but so we just have completed a new update for both CPAC and WAS. And so the WAS body of knowledge is going to be updated to reflect current changes, mandates, and other things. CPAC is updated to reflect a lot of new rules, regulations, and regional bodies of awareness and requirements. We've had a lot more countries adopt sign language or accessibility requirements, including in the subcontinent and parts of the world that didn't have regulations on the books. So our work is that we do set forth those projects at least once every year or two to start to look at what's changed, what needs to be updated, and then we publish those in that body of knowledge, and then update the exams to test to the change.
Exactly. So what I understand is that a certified professional is at par, at pace to the advancements, and he has been tested for that via the examinations which are conducted. So he's adept with the newest of technologies, of the latest technologies and accessibility, and he's also been tested for this via the examinations.
And the other thing that's important is that professional certifications are a bit different than a skills test. So if you learn a software product and you take the test from that software product being developer, you're saying that you can sufficiently support that product, which is unique to that. But they may not make you come back. They may make you take a test again in a few years when they've made updates. But a professional certification has a requirement for ongoing learning and or leading. And so what we expect our certificates, people who earned our certifications, is that across the 3 years that their certification is valid, that they are actively participating in learning, in professional development, in training to stay on top of what's happened in the world, how their industry and their profession and their tools are changing, so that they can still be somebody that can lead with knowledge and understanding. So there is a requirement in a professional certification to maintain that learning and knowledge. And it's a certain number of hours across 3 years. But the largest one is for people who hold 2 of our certifications to spend 1.6 hours a month in training and education. So we're not talking about, and none of them have to have a fee associated. So there's not a financial expense either. So you can pursue this education, training, and learning without having any cost associated. So it shouldn't be a financial burden for somebody to be able to engage in that learning across the years.
So Sam, help me with this, that versus not getting certified, and then the other option of participating and getting one certified via the IAAP certification, how would it impact my professional career growth? That's one part of the question. And also the second part is that does IAAP build any kind of association amongst accessibility professionals from across the world or any specific region? Does it also help playing a bridge or a connection between professionals across the world in the space of accessibility? These two things, if you could address, please.
Of course. So IAAP's mission is to define, promote, and improve and diversify the accessibility profession. So the membership organization has that set as its mission, and that is accomplished through certification, education, and networking. So certification, you do not have to be an IAAP member to earn one of our certifications. So there's some discounts if you are a member, and some access that's at no fee as a member. But the goal with any professional certification is that it is a way that you can express your commitment to a profession, where there are some standards that have been set, that it's not just a person or a product or a company that's driving any type of set of assessments. So it's, number one, it's a way that you can express a commitment to that profession or to that set of skills or to that set of knowledge. What happens in the hiring process is that companies may perceive there to be a particular value set and going, this person can illustrate, this person can show, this person has shown a professional organization that they have this years of experience, or that they have the ability to use these concepts and apply them in work. And so that is the perceived value that comes to companies. For organizations that put out bids to get business to be hired, their value is that they can tell their customers, I
Correct.
have hired people that hold this capacity that's been
Certificate.
reviewed by a professional organization. So when
Right.
I hire people or when my employees earn this, it's vetted
Hmm.
by an external organization.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I will say certifications should not be the only thing that gets someone a job. Everyone's
Hmm.
experience should be the base, and certifications are a way to differentiate yourself, help you stand out from a crowd of many
Hmm.
people who say, of course I do accessibility. Well, how do you know that as a hiring manager? You can do the interviews and ask the questions, and that's great, and that should happen. So, but understanding what the certifications are meant to do is to illustrate knowledge at the levels as they're designed. So they are certainly a way that people can differentiate themselves, give themselves possibly an advantage in a hiring process. But as professions grow, when people know what
Hmm.
accessibility means because they know it's a profession, that will be when we all collectively earn a greater position in the world. Right now, it's still
I
something that
absolutely
those
agree.
people do
Hmm.
or that building person does. So, as we build a profession together, we elevate
Hmm.
the importance of this unique set of skills and knowledge. And certifications are one way to show that to the world.
No, absolutely. I think it comes from the endorsement of the skill set by a third party, which is outside the organization, is the value addition or the proposition which companies can pitch to their internal stakeholders or external about the authenticity and also the skill set which the people would be working on their projects on. And I absolutely understand the value that certification offers. It's one thing to be skillful, and then there's another thing to be endorsed for that skill, and that's where the difference lies.
So we don't necessarily promote or endorse a person and their and what they deliver, but it is
Right.
saying that you have successfully illustrated your ability to show these concepts in application, and that's a big value. That's what you find in other professions, accounting,
Mm.
in different types of professions. You expect to somebody that's going to do your books for your company, you would want a chartered accountant. So they have experience and have passed a capacity or proficiency exam. So we're familiar with that in other professions. And so IAAP
Mm.
certifications are definitely one way, in addition to experience that people can bring forth and
Mm.
show something that's benchmarked, that's been established by a protocol. So it takes a lot of years to build a certification exam and to maintain it.
Correct.
And
Absolutely.
it
Hats off
takes
for that.
hundreds of hours from volunteers that are accessibility
Yeah.
professionals to review the content, update the content, and then for
Mm.
them, they're the ones who write the questions. So it's not a set of staff
Right.
somewhere. It's actually accessibility professionals that write the questions and review the exam. So
Okay.
it's by accessibility professionals for accessibility professionals. It's not a corporate strategy.
Okay. So that's insights on the structuring is happening within IAP. It's not a corporate, so to say. It's driven by and it's for the people who are in the space of accessibility. So it's a community-led initiative of sorts.
It
So that's
is.
how it is. No, wonderful for sharing that, and I think that's something which is uh, heartening to see that it's because I believe that a top-down or a corporate approach at times compromises the essence to which the entity was formed, and it's heartening to see that it's a community-led initiative back at IAP. Uh, so help me understand this, Sam, that in terms of the horizons or in terms of the landscape of accessibility, is IAP also contributing to the advancements in the space of accessibility via greater advocacy, awareness, or collaborations? Are you working to that effect too in IAP?
So the entire organization for IAAP, the core purpose is for growing awareness, growing education, growing knowledge, and the
Right.
access to policymakers and inclusion in conversations with
Hmm.
policymakers around the world, and providing awareness about changes in industry, in technology, in governance regulations. So the membership side of the organization itself is dedicated to only that. And so
Okay.
there's wide swaths of both free and paid, member and non-member engagement opportunities. We just did a 2-day celebration with the European celebration of the third anniversary of the Web Accessibility Directive. We're looking at what's coming down with IAAP. We're already looking at what's going to happen in 2025 for the EN mandates about procurement. So we also have a lot of engagement with what's happening in Canada, in the UK. So all around the world, our membership is now, I believe, in about 103 countries around the world. So the goal is to connect accessibility professionals, new, established, and those who've led the way for decades to come together and be able to interact with each other so we can build the next 2 to 3 generations of accessibility
of
professionals.
accessibility professionals. Wonderful. Um, the another thing, there are different standards of accessibility. I believe Europe has its own standards, and then there is the standards which are in the US, and down south in India, we are having our own version of the accessibility standards. Don't you think that there may be some commonality, but can the certifications which IAP extends create some kind of centralization of standards so that it should not happen, futuristically speaking, that something which is accessible, say in the US, might have constraints in Europe, and they might be so region by region. If there is a difference in standards of accessibility, eventually it makes a very complex situation for a product owner to adhere to standards which are of different countries. So can't there be a central kind of a certification or a centralized standard which could be maybe extended by IP, which could help solve this puzzle?
So IAAP doesn't have a goal to become a standard issuing
Yeah.
organization. We want to work collectively with all of the people that are creating standards. As I understand it, at the moment, WCAG is still the central core international standard. Each country, province, and region of the world may have their own adaptations, most of which
Okay.
in the US, I believe what they called is to harmonize, to incorporate
Hmm.
some of those or all of those standards into the local provisions. So
Right.
we work within CPACC, within CPAC, to make a list of the current standards and how those may vary so that people are aware that there are different
Hmm.
regional or different national standards and how those may vary. Because in an
Hmm.
international business world, if you're not aware of those
Right.
challenges, you can't serve those needs. You might not be eligible to do business with.
Absolutely.
And if you're building a product or a company and you're working to market, your knowledge needs to be, I need to be aware of these if I want to reach all of the world. So
Correct.
our
Correct.
goal within IAAP is to make sure there's awareness on the certification side that CPAC lists within reason, the on the
Hmm.
books listed regulations, governance practices, etc. And as a larger IAAP, to make sure that people are aware of those changes as they come online.
Okay.
So we know even within Europe that there are countries that have their own regulations, most
Correct.
of which are similar, but they do call it. And
Hmm.
so in order to be a good business partner and a good advocacy partner, being aware of those is something that we can make aware of, and we can list and include that in
Right.
education. I don't think
Right.
that IAAP, we have no desire to write a new standard.
Okay.
That's not our goal.
Okay.
Our goal is to
Okay.
support the work of the professionals
Hmm.
that are out there who are by volunteer work or within their own countries contributing to those standards. And I think what we find
Right.
in most parts of the world is that it's
Understood.
happening from accessibility champions and people who are really passionate are getting ICT policies
So
in place. They're seeing the adoptions happen in their country at the national level, which is brilliant because in many of those
right.
countries that there has been an absence. There was nothing before. So I don't know that there will be one repository that
No, I
lists everything, but I think we can work
understand.
towards awareness. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. So what I understand is that we will have broad commonalities and then customizations which may happen country specifically, which would need to be
Mm-hmm.
accustomed by a product owner to satisfy the legislatures or the compliance requirements country wise.
Yes.
While broadly there are common standards which would in a way checkbox tick most of the conditions. Wherever customizations may be required, it's up to those companies to adhere to. No, that makes sense.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense because I think that's the way for the future too. And so the in today's question which I have in mind is that there's a lot of business imperative along the legal compliances which are in place towards accessibility. So what happens is that what I would want to know is that does it have to be accessibility? Is it going to be compliance driven or should it be intent driven from a business standpoint? How should it be structured for greater adoptability?
So I'll give you the SAM
I know
answer,
it's
and
a
I'll give
tricky
you
question.
what the probably
It's a tricky question.
reality-based answer is. The SAM answer and the IAAP
Okay.
answer will always be, we need to meet the needs of disabled people first as the focus of all of our motivation for inclusion. It needs to be focused on the person
Right.
first. However, that's not usually what makes business change, except in some instances. So I think we will continue to see compliance as a desire for
Okay.
how people believe they have achieved accessibility. More mature
Hmm.
governance, I think, is what would be most beneficial, is that for organizations to mature, where not only do they understand compliance as the starting block, but that their way to show governance maturity is that they make change across the organization, not just in technical components for code. So I think that mature organizations show us that they have a people-focused center and the
Hmm.
ability to meet compliance requirements, and that they marry those two together in their usability and their process so that before code is deployed, someone has tested it because they
Hmm.
understand the impact on people. So
Okay. Okay.
I think as a world, we have more to do to make it people-focused first. But
Right. I get it. I get it. So it's always a very tricky question because it has to be correct and it has to be real world based too,
realistic.
and that's where the problem is. No, I do absolutely get that, and very well answered, Sam. Thank you so much for it. And one last question before we conclude the podcast. For the future generations of accessibility professionals, and with the hope and optimism for them to excel, what would be your advice for these upcoming professionals, and how do you foresee the future of accessibility to grow to?
I think, first off, everyone should celebrate their learning, their education and training. Everything that we do to learn, whether that's from friends or in a formal setting, that's super important. And with as fast as everything changes, we all should
Hmm.
endeavor to learn more, be lifelong learners, especially in accessibility and in disability rights. Things have changed so much, and cultural practices and language included change, and it's different around the world. So being a global lifelong learner is going to be essential to be an accessibility professional. How we
Okay.
advance things, I think we have to be realistic about
Hmm.
understanding how artificial intelligence and XR and VR are going to come into our world, but we
Right.
cannot, and I will go back, this will be my forever. I don't have superlatives of always, never, except that we always
Hmm.
have to first focus on the needs of disabled people and how they choose to engage with the
Hmm.
world around them by what is
Right.
available to them. So
Hmm.
we have to start there. We can make things fancy and decorative and have all of the bells and whistles in the world, but if it puts an additional layer of work or learning
Right.
between the person and their technology to live, learn, work, and play in their environment of
Hmm.
choice, we aren't advancing equity. We aren't advancing accessibility. So we need to keep in mind what the actual needs are. And so
Right.
sometimes that can get a little fuzzy with things
Hmm.
that look fancy. Um,
Hmm.
but we need to make sure that's our core tenet. As long as we keep coming back to understanding that as our purpose, we can do good work. We can do good work
Hmm.
for good reasons. So there's going to be a lot of drive to not understand on the technical side. If I could just get everybody who works in code to understand HTML, we could solve a lot of things with just semantic HTML. But a lot of people
Correct.
have drag and drop and don't understand core semantics, which means it's not
Mm,
possible for them to understand the impact. So some basics we have to stick to. Some basics
mm.
for now.
Understand.
It's going to change really
And
fast. That may be different in 5 years, but we have to understand the impact on people to be able to do better. And I think sometimes that gets missed in the technical world.
Sam, people feel that the presentation, or let's say as you said, something which may sound very jazzy and may look a very professional website. Sometimes aesthetics comes at the cost of compromised accessibility. Do you think this statement is correct or false? What does yours say to it?
I have been working with designers for more than a decade to teach them that you do not have to give up visual design for accessible design.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you can make a beautiful website. It can be engaging and be
Hmm.
accessible. But we have to start
Okay.
with the tenet that I do not want to exclude any group of people
Hmm.
from being able
Hmm.
to engage with this website. And when we understand what our choices are and we choose something that's not accessible, that doesn't support our efforts for equity. So it does not have to be black
Makes
and
sense.
white. It does not have to be text only. It can be interactive, but there are
Hmm.
components within each design choice that we can choose. And if we are conscious
Makes sense.
about that on purpose, you can have a
Hmm.
creative, beautifully designed website that could win awards that can also be accessible,
Understood. On that
or
thought,
platform or
that
product or service. So
no, absolutely, absolutely, and I feel that if it's aesthetically very appealing, but it excludes an audience, then what use is it? Eventually, uh, it spells of exclusion from the way it starts, and if that's the case, then how does it eventually solve the problem for all? It addresses the problem of some at the cost of all. I think that's where the
it,
the difference is. So yeah,
and
that's
I
where it
don't believe
is.
that anybody wants to design or deliver something that is exclusive on
Right.
purpose. But I think it really does require us to shift our thinking from the beginning when we start with a concept. I
Hmm.
need to be aware that my choices and strategy will impact people. What do
Hmm.
I need to know? How do I need to understand this before I go to the next step in my design concept? What do I need to be aware of? And that's a big shift. That's probably the biggest shift, is in the
No,
shift
I
in
agree.
thinking about inclusion from the beginning to then have practice and plans and projects that can be inclusive, so that when you get to delivery, your beta is actually your minimally viable product is accessible, so that it doesn't have to be remediated or it doesn't put anyone at risk. But that's a big shift, to start thinking about
No,
disability as part of your audience from the beginning.
I understand. It's more of a mental shift, a psychological shift that status quo or what has been done for so long does not necessarily make it right because it's been done for so long, and I think that's where the difference is. Um,
It is, and it's
and
it's
actually,
uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to
yeah.
present that, because the
Hmm.
reality means we have to be aware and acknowledge that before we weren't doing that. And it's okay to be uncomfortable, because that discomfort
Hmm.
is what's going to lead to the possibility for change to make things different. But that uncomfortable moment is where people in lots of phases along the way
Hmm.
just put up stops because they feel like they've been wrong, or they've been accused of doing something wrong. But that's how we learn to change, is that we need to make changes on purpose. So
Great, great. Thank you so much, Sam, for this insightful podcast. And it's such a pleasure speaking to you and understanding your thoughts on accessibility. And straight up, I can say it's one of the best interviews that I have done, because uh, what happens is in the while of not addressing the question, people kind of shift from uncomfortable questions, and you've been able to fend them quite well. Thank you so much for that. And uh, I express my gratitude from all my viewers and also from the team at Nabet. for you for giving your time to this podcast.
I'm happy to join you and support your work.
Pleasure speaking. Thank you so much. Thank you so much,
Thank
Sam,
you.
for this. Bye.